welcome, Dr Malcolm Kendrick. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Now, you've been on the front line of trying to spread the facts around COVID-19, and a lot of people are curious to know about Sweden's approach and results. So we're going to talk about that first, but I just want to reiterate that, the audience here is from Victoria. So of course you understand that seems to be one of the worst places in the world for restrictions and perhaps a disproportionate response to COVID-19. So it's really important that we have people like you with titles and accreditations that can actually tell us the truth so that we can not feel as fearful, but also, get to the bottom of what's going on. So I'll just start off by asking you the first question, Doctor, is about Sweden. So what was the rationale behind Sweden's decision not to take the lockdown approach like so many other countries did?
Well, from what I can understand, and I haven't spoken to the people making decisions in Sweden, but from what they've written, it seems to be that they felt that the main concern was going to be overwhelming the hospitals. I think they thought, well, we're not going to overwhelm our hospitals because we think we've got enough capacity. And therefore, what we're going to try and do, they didn't do nothing. They did stop like major stadium events, etc. But they still had meetings of 50. They still went to restaurants. They still went to school. Before the children went to school, people still went to work. So they had a sort of 30% lockdown or something. I wouldn't call it a lockdown. And that was on the basis that, well, we haven't got a vaccine. We haven't necessarily got treatment. So what we're going to try and do is build up a herd immunity as quickly as possible. And that's where they really went for. And they didn't overwhelm their hospitals. And whether or not they've achieved herd immunity is difficult to tell because the testings regime is very inaccurate. But it looks like it's finished in Sweden. Last time I looked over, they had a daily death rate of 1 a day or something, which is virtually nothing. So I think that was I know that was their reasoning. So.
And is it curious to you why other countries aren't using the success of Sweden more as a way for them to get out of this pandemic as well?
Well, I don't think it's curious. I think I understand it. It's that people, once you've gone down a path and you have so much investment in it, it is incredibly difficult to go, oops, actually it looks like we got this wrong and Sweden got it right and we've gone down the wrong approach, because people just don't like doing that. I don't think it's curious at all. And in fact, what is happening is also expected. Sweden's being attacked and they're saying, they haven't done the right thing at all and they're getting more and more cases and look at how terrible it all is. These are just general standard emotional responses rather than say, you know what, sorry, they got it right, but we got it wrong. Oh, and by the way, look at Norway and Denmark. They had much fewer deaths than Sweden. And you think, well, their deaths have yet to come potentially,
So, sorry to simplify this, but are you saying that potentially what we're going through in Melbourne and a lot of other places in the world are going through is literally just they can't admit that they were wrong?
I think it comes down to that, essentially. I can't see any other rationale for it. Because, you can look at other countries didn't lock down as well. Japan didn't lock down at all. And their death rate is vanishingly small compared to that of almost every Western country that you can look at. So it's not just Sweden. South Korea didn't actually lock down either. I mean, although they did a very much more impressive track and trace. But no, I do believe that we're in a situation where people are just thinking, right, we're going down a path. We cannot say that this is the wrong path. We're going to go down it, come hell or high water. I mean, we've now moved from stopping the peak of the first wave so we didn't overwhelm the health service, which was the original thinking, to we have to eliminate this virus, which is a completely different approach and absolutely insane, because you're just never going to achieve this. So which suggests we're going to be doing this forever if we're not careful.
Being from Melbourne and going through what we're going through right now, it honestly, I haven't heard someone with your accreditation say something so simple like they just can't admit they're wrong, and it makes me feel actually honestly sick to my stomach. But thank you for sharing that, because a lot of people go down a rabbit hole of why they think they're doing things, but that is just such a simple way to explain it. Wow. Now, you talked about, this idea that we're trying to eradicate COVID-19. Now, in Victoria, they've set up a roadmap where they're not going to basically ease restrictions until we have under 5 cases. You know, how realistic is that?
Well, I mean, you might achieve it, I suppose. I mean, it's not impossible. It's not impossible if you put in draconian restrictions and lockdown for months, years. I suppose in the end, you will achieve this. If there's any economy left, if anyone's still left going, then perhaps you could do this. But realistically, you know, this is just a nonsense approach, because then what are you going to do? Never allow anyone into your country ever again. And we don't really know how this thing is transmitted for sure, you know, and then the chances of absolutely, you know, you'd have to put the entire country in a biosuit probably forever and never ever let that biosuit leak, because there's going to be virus around in the rest of the world. So what are you going to do? Never visit another country, never allow any visitors in, you know, never allow people on business trips. I mean, it's so unrealistic. I mean, yes, theoretically, on paper, assuming human beings are numbers that can be controlled perfectly, you could possibly do this. But the reality is, in the world, we can't do this. It's just not possible. And it will always keep flaring up here and there. It's just going to happen. So
it's possible in 10 years if we all just live in a bubble, maybe. Okay, so yeah, that's yeah, wow. I really hope that's not the kind of life that we have to look forward to, because I'm not done traveling if that's... Anyway, we'll move on. You've mentioned the interesting fact that every other disease seems to have just disappeared now that COVID's around. What's happening with other patients, with other diseases and cancer and all that other stuff?
Well, I don't think they haven't entirely disappeared, but the focus has just gone. I mean, what you tend to find is, yes, I sometimes liken the focus of the media and the attention of the world to be like a lighthouse light that sweeps around and then suddenly stops and then highlights an area, and everything else is in darkness, and then suddenly it sweeps on again. At the moment, we've got COVID, it's stuck, it points at that, and everything else is in the darkness. Yes, I mean, personally, I've watched at least 2 patients who's this is in the UK, and I've been face to face with patients since the start of this pandemic, and dealing with people and being told not to wear face masks. But really, these patients, their chemotherapy for their cancer was just stop dead, bang, that's it. We're not doing it because you can't get it anymore because of COVID, and they both basically turned their face to the wall and died quite quickly, which can often happen. So I mean, this is terrible. Other conditions, yes. I mean, I had a lady in a nursing home who tried to get admitted to hospital. They wouldn't admit her because they said, oh, well, she's elderly, she's in a care home, you know, we're not taking her to the hospital. I said, well, I don't know for sure it's COVID, and they eventually managed to get her in. Turned out that it was sepsis, not from COVID. She died. Had I got her in earlier, she would have lived. So, you know, we are actually killing people with our focus on COVID. We are not treating other people correctly. In the UK, the Office for National Statistics have suggested that at least 16,000 deaths. Sorry, I've just got someone at the door. It'll be Amazon, yeah, no doubt. Sorry. Okay. Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, so you were talking about the patient who just died from sepsis.
Yeah, the patients who died from sepsis, and the Office of National Statistics have said that looking at it from the diseases not treated correctly, I mean, people are not coming into accident emergency with heart attacks or strokes or other things. Their estimation is that 16,000 deaths in the United Kingdom are a direct result of the actions that we took against COVID. So that's our excess deaths in the UK was something like 65,000. If you start tracking it down, you can get to about half of those excess deaths. I mean, people can argue the statistics, and no doubt will, but half of those excess deaths are a direct result of the actions we took with lockdown. For example, throwing elderly people out of hospital into care homes. Now, this disease is pretty mild, and it's really not something to worry about in the population, a healthy population under 70. The risk of this disease seriously damaging or killing you is vanishingly small. But we took the elderly population, in whom this is a serious condition, and we incubated our care homes with this disease. And that's another 20,000. So, I mean, you can make an argument, and I do make this argument, I will be making it in my another blog, that if you add all the figures together of deaths caused as a result of the actions we took, caused as many deaths in the United Kingdom as COVID has caused. In other words, had we done nothing, we'd have got half of the deaths that we got. And I think a lot less than half of the deaths, because a lot of our deaths were in the elderly population. I mean, I jumped up and down and shouted at various people, why are we clearing the hospitals out and putting patients into care homes? And we did these things. Sweden actually also did this, by the way, and they accept that they should not have done this, and that a large number of their deaths were due to those specific actions. So although their death rate is a lot lower than the UK, it would have been a lot lower than the, well, depending on what the UK had done, it'd been a lot lower than the UK had they not done that same stupid thing, which they also did in the United States and in Italy and in Spain, and the countries that had real wipeout death rates. Essentially, you can look at it, it was the elderly, it was the actions they took in clearing out hospitals, locking them down, and basically leaving the elderly to fend by themselves. So, I mean, you know, if we had the world over again, I think we would see this very differently and deal with it very differently.
Well, you know, those mistakes are almost understandable back then because we didn't have the data that we now have. So, you know, at least Sweden picked themselves up and changed it. So that's the difference, isn't it? You know, so you're making this argument now and it's not even over. So imagine the roll-on effect of the problems. I mean, they're uncalculatable.
Well, I mean, well, I think they are. In fact, I was making these arguments. Actually, I was making these arguments right from day one. In fact, before day one of lockdown in the UK, I said, do not do this. Do not do this. Of course, they did it. But, you know, so it just shows the effect that I have. But, I mean, they've said in the States, the United States, the CDC, Center for Communicable Diseases, have calculated, I mean, they've had about 190,000 deaths from COVID. Are they all from COVID? Who knows? The statistics are impossible to calculate now. There's been so much manipulation of what's happened. However, the CDC said that of the 180 or 90,000 deaths, 9,000 are directly attributable to COVID. In other words, there were about 9,000 people who died of COVID and had nothing else going on with them, which is about 6% of the total. So, you know, what that means, I mean, interpreting that is very difficult. What that basically means is unless you were elderly, unless you had multiple other medical conditions, you're just extraordinarily unlikely to die from this disease. And so we should have been right from the start, as I said, well, we should have been protecting the vulnerable and letting the rest of society get on with their lives. And instead of which, we protected the young and the non-vulnerable and severely damaged the elderly, vulnerable population. We got this exactly the wrong way around and killed. We did kill these people. Maybe not directly. I'm not suggesting someone shot them with a gun, but our actions are directly responsible for the death rates that we've seen in these countries. You know, children in the UK, there is not a single, I believe the last time I looked, there's not a single child and I was up in Scotland, who has died, and that's under the age of 20, who has died from COVID, who did not have any underlying serious medical condition. And there were only, I believe, 3 deaths anyway in a population of 5 million. That's in a population under the age of 20. That's more than a quarter. It's a third of your total population. No deaths. I mean, you're locking down the world on the basis of something. I mean, we should have been protecting the elderly. Yes, I accept in the elderly, vulnerable population with other conditions, this is quite a nasty disease. It's incredibly specific to that population. And we did know this at the start. And about the 11th of March, I was looking at statistics from Italy, where this first hit in Europe. And the average age of death was 82 at that time. I mean, this was known. This was known. And everybody should know it. So, I mean, we are just floundering about. And again, I put this down to the inability of people to say, look, we need to rethink this. We got this horribly wrong at the start. This was just a catastrophic series of errors that we got ourselves into. We have to step back from this. just because we don't want to look stupid, just because we don't want to look like we've made idiotic mistakes, just because we believed in a bunch of models that were created using figures that were unknown and have been proven to be completely inaccurate, does not mean you can't stop doing this. Please, for God's sake, stop doing this.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I've only got like 2 more questions, but you know, it's obviously aggravating for the everyday person who knows bits and pieces of what you know. But for someone with all the knowledge and capabilities that you have with your accreditations, what is one thing that you would say to someone who is possessed with fear about this? What's one thing you would say to them to kind of ease their mind or give them hope, if you could?
Well, I think this is far less for the population under 70 or 75, or choose your arbitrary tick-off time, who is otherwise well. This disease is far less deadly than a normal influenza. It's far less deadly than that. So there's no need to be frightened of it. It's really extraordinarily unlikely to cause you a problem. Just because you've seen people aged 30 and 40 on the news, if they get one case of somebody who's 30, it's on the front pages of the news. The pictures are there. They're in ICU with a tube up their throat, and they're going, it can affect everybody. It's like, yes, it can affect everybody. But, you know, people accept the like driving a car. If you're under 70, your chances of dying driving a car are greater than they would be with COVID. You're willing to accept those risks. You're willing to put yourself into those situations. This is so low risk for you. Just do not worry.
If you could think of one message that you would tell our Premier, who is not giving up the state of emergency, he's not opening up schools, he's got curfews in place, he's not letting us see our friends. If you had one message to give to him, what would you say?
You know, I feel sorry for the politicians in one way. They were frightened into this by the experts, and now they're in a terrible kind of bind, which is, well, if I release this, well, you will release it, the infection rates will start to go up, at least the detected infection rates. Some more people will die. Yes, this is going to happen, a very few. But the reality is that lockdown and the long-term effects of lockdown are really hugely damaging to people. You're going to be killing more people with lockdown than COVID could kill. And as time goes by, the more you damage your economy, the more you damage your health service, the more you create fear, the more that people find it really, really difficult to get on with their lives, the greater this problem will be. You're at a tipping point right now. You have to be bold and brave and say, right, we need to create a different strategy. If that strategy is protect your elderly as much as possible, fine, work out ways to do it, but don't make it compulsory. Elderly people can make their decisions themselves, whether they want to take a risk or not. My mother's 92. She says, I've lived long enough now. If I get it, I get it. If I die, I die. You know, there are people, that's a decision that people can make for themselves. Yeah. Those that want to be protected, work out ways of protecting them at that age. Wait for the vaccine that may or may not work. Perhaps that's going to work. But do not continue with this ridiculous situation, because you're going to find it impossible to get out of it. And you're causing more harm than good. I honestly believe you've just got to look at ways of getting yourself out of this situation.
Thank you. I hope he hears that message. I doubt he will, but it'd be nice. It's nice for Victorians to hear that, because it's just nice. Thank you for batting for us. Now, something I forgot at the beginning to ask you to just introduce yourself and just tell me a bit about
my name is Dr Malcolm Kendrick. I work in I think they call them general practitioners in Australia as well as they do here. We're exporting a few to you at the moment. I'm a family doctor. I work with the elderly primarily at the moment. I have a particular interest in looking at heart disease, and I've written several books, one of which is trying to help people to understand medical statistics and medical terminology. So I feel I have a kind of expertise in helping people understand what figures mean. So I've done quite a lot of that with regard to COVID, to try and help people to understand when they hear these figures what they're all about. I'm not an infectious disease specialist, but I can understand figures, and in fact I teach people how to understand figures, so that's my expertise.
And if someone wants to read your material, how do they do that?
Well, I've got a blog, drmalcolmkendrick.org. I've also a couple of books, 2 or 3 books. One is called The Great Cholesterol Con, so you can see that I'm controversial in that area as well. Another one is Doctoring Data, and another one is A Statin Nation, looking at overtreatment of cardiovascular conditions. So I think if people want to do and look at those things, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Great. Now, one more thing, I promise it's the last thing. There are a lot of doctors out there that know something's not quite right about how this is being handled on a massive scale. Why have you taken it on board to be one of the doctors that's putting yourself out there? What motivated you to do that?
Well, I think it's the old-fashioned thing, isn't it? If not you, who? If not now, when? I've tended to be relatively controversial for a few years, so I've learned how to do this, and the sky doesn't fall. I mean, the medical profession is very, very conservative with both a small and a large C, and they don't want to rock the boat. And if other doctors are saying it, they do go along with things. This is just a reality. Probably the most going along with things profession that exists. So I can understand the reluctance to step forward, and you'll be shouted down and hounded down, and the usual easy attack is you just want people to die, and of course, which I say is, no, I don't want people to die. I'm a doctor. I want people to live. And yeah, someone has to say this. Someone has to do this. If I can create a movement around which other doctors coalesce, fantastic. But if they want a bit of shelter, well, I'm out there. I'm willing to take the battering that is inevitably occurs. I've been used to it for a while. I've got a sort of tough hide, and I don't back down. That's just me. So I know that about myself, and I'd hope that maybe other doctors can now move forward or say something and say, you know what, that guy's saying is what I'm thinking. Thank goodness someone is finally saying it. So I think if, like many things, if there is something to coalesce around, I think that happens. So I'm hoping that just by standing there and saying these things, the things that I'm getting wrong, other people can get right on my behalf. If I'm overdoing statements, they can tone them down a bit. If however, it allows them the strength to stand up and say things, then fantastic, because, well, that's what it's all about, really, isn't it?
Well, thank you for having the guts.